G'day, everybody, and welcome to the very first episode of the Crabtree Performance Podcast. Today, I am very fortunate to have an exceptional mind and a brilliant guest, Dean McKillop. Dean is a renowned coach, educator, and the co-founder of Flex Success. We dive deep into the art and science behind coaching, and Dean shares his philosophy of managing athletes' unique need, the evolution of the fitness industry, and the importance of balancing soft skills with technical expertise. Beyond Dean's expertise, Dean is a digital nomad who has traveled the world while building Flex Success. He is also an advocate for navigating today's information-saturated fitness landscape and is passionate about empowering others to cut through the noise to find credible, actionable knowledge. In this episode, we'll explore some of his journey, insights into the current state of the coaching industry, and the lessons he's learned managing athletes and building a business with his wife, Lizzie.
As we proceed to give you what you need.
Alrighty, mate. Dean, thanks for coming on.
Mate, pleasure. Thanks for having
First episode of the Crabtree Performance Podcast, which is, I honestly thought it was probably adequate to have you on, considering you have over the last, for those who don't know, Dean and I have been working with each other, or he's been my coach for the last probably going on 5 years now. I think I came on board with you in November or October of 2020. So it's been a while. So it'll be 5 years. In this October?
Yeah, you're one of the few people where I have like a couple of different folders for, where like usually it's just the person's name, but I actually have you like in a few different years, because I'm like, this was this year. This was a different human. This is the current human.
Yeah. But honestly, I thought it was adequate to have you on, considering I think that you've contributed exceptionally largely to, either directly or indirectly, whether I've specifically asked you a question or, just in the way you've gone about it, and through my own kind of listening, both when you coaching me and then others as well. So I thought that would be, a really good thing to do. And I have obviously, a number of people that are very, very interested in what you have to say. So excited to dive in and touch on a little bit. But mate, obviously you are someone who does frequent podcasts relatively often. So I've had to listen through to a few of them. Not that I haven't listened prior, but I've refreshed my memory, and I'm going to try and speak about a few things that you may not have touched on in any sort of depth yet. First and foremost, young Dean. So I wanted to touch on a little bit about your background. I know we've spoken about it in the past, specifically around kind of you playing football and whatnot, but just for the listeners, what was young Dean like growing up? Take us through kind of the early sporting days, what you were like at school and whatnot.
Yeah. Normally rush through these, right? Because people ask you who you are and what do you do and whatnot. And I'm like, here's the quick little snapshot of it. But man, I was born in a little country town like 3 hours northwest of Brisbane called Dalby. My old man went out there for work, and it's a tiny little town, so much so that like I was born in 87. I don't think they got McDonald's until about 99. So like I was gone by then, but like it's a small little country town that's like known for farming for both, grains and also like cattle. And at the age of, my dad was really, really heavily involved with rugby league at a state level in regards to coaching, and then also at a local level there. So that was his thing. And I, for some reason, decided to kick a soccer ball when I was 4. And that was my interest. And thankfully, my parents just sort of let me do whatever I wanted to do with regards to sport. Dad didn't push me into rugby league. So I ended up actually playing soccer from the age of 4. But the only available, the age bracket, I think, at the time was under 6s. Yeah. So from the very beginning, I was like always sort of like pushed, I suppose, to be better. And that was my life, man, honestly, from the age of 4 until about the age of, I always forget the age. It was about maybe age of 21 or 22, something like that. In that I played outdoor during the winter. I went from outdoor to indoor and played futsal during the summer. Then when I got to high school, I would then sprinkle in, first 11 cricket as a bowler and a sort of like a third or fourth change batter, and athletics. So like I didn't not do sport for a weekend, I don't think, for like 17 years straight.
Yeah.
That was me, man. And all I cared about, honestly, when I was a young fella was football. Like my dream, I still remember it. Like my dad said, "Oh, what do you want to be?" I was like, "All right, I want to live in Italy. I want to play football, and I want to have a blue convertible." How times have
Blue
changed
convertible.
in regards to the color of car and also the type of car. I couldn't care less for that anymore. But I mean, living in Italy is actually going to be a 4-week thing in about 2 months' time. We're going to go do that, so that's kind of cool. I left school. Like I went to an all-boys school that was like heavily focused on sport, but it was a rugby union school. But I was also good at athletics and cricket there. So like I was kind of allowed to be good at that. I didn't actually play soccer at school at all because it was always clashed with my weekend games. I was chosen for the Australian futsal team when I was maybe like 15 or something like that. I was a part of the Queensland Academy of Sport for soccer when I was around about that sort of similar age. I was recruited actually to do competitive track cycling when I was at high school based on athletic predisposed limitations for people that should be good at that based on stats like a vertical jump, weight, and all that kind of stuff. But I never pursued it because it was ridiculously expensive. And also I just wanted to play football. So from there, man, like I ended up doing like some tours of the UK. I did a tour of Japan. And then from the UK, I picked up some trials there, which I went over there when I was 16, I think, by myself with another friend at the time, and went around and trialed at a few youth teams in the UK as an Australian. I was earmarked as like a potential signing from a club there called Cambridge United, which were like a really good youth team. But being an Australian at the time, that was when kind of like passport requirements shifted, and you weren't allowed to be in the UK for any period of time and or earn money as an Australian. Whereas maybe like, I want to say like 2 years prior to that, if you were over there for sport, you could kind of like free reign it. So I was requested to go back there, I think somewhere around the mid-year when I was like 17, just turned 17. But that meant I had to leave school again. Like I'd already left school for like 6 weeks, and they weren't really too keen on that. But I left school anyway, man. I left school and became a landscaper for like 3 months to pay my own way, and then got injured and never went back. Not to say that I would have been successful, but it would have been a different life, that's for sure, if I was. So that was 17, man. And then I went to uni from there and ended up finding my passion, I suppose, in like nutrition and personal physical endeavor as opposed to team.
Did you ever have any sort of, like, with your father being, involved in coaching and whatnot with regards to rugby, did you ever kind of have any sort of, association to that? Or was it just once you kind of finished playing, semi-professionally yourself that you thought this could be an avenue? Or was it still years later until you kind of got into that coaching space? Because, I mean, it's very similar to how I kind of went about, obviously I'm talking about football. So Aussie rules, not quite soccer, even though, it's obviously football, but like going through the ranks and whatnot. And my dad was heavily involved as a player and as a coach. And then I never really had any sort of desire to, like, very similar to yourself, like probably to my detriment, didn't care about anything else, whether it was people outside my family. I didn't care about having friendships. I didn't care about anything else. I was just like, I'm going to play AFL and that's going to be it. Did you kind of have any sort of kind of specific ideas about coaching or anything like that? Or you were just solely committed, I'm going to be, professional soccer player? And
I never had coaching interest, but I always took a mature role, I suppose, within each soccer team I played in that I was not always the captain, but I may have always been at least involved in that group. So, and I was always like kind of a leader, I suppose, even in, the expectations of fitness or the expectations of work ethic or whatever it may be. So there was a lot of that. I also think, like, in soccer, there's this like really, really, really high demand or high expectation on the elite to do a lot of practice outside of just team practice. I don't know if it's the same in other things. Like, I'm not sure what other kind of like skilled practice you could do as a rugby league player because there's not as much footwork. Maybe you could practice footwork, sure. But yeah, so no, not really. but I think it was probably a natural progression of mine coming out the back of team sport, because I was always like in a leadership role, and I did really enjoy like that kind of, I suppose, coaching esque sort of aspect of being a captain or leading the team.
Cool. Yeah, I mean, that's kind of, I think I've heard you speak about it before, but with regards to kind of soft skills in coaching, especially in the amateur kind of coaching scene, if we're referring to specifically Australia, I think it's something that I was lucky and fortunate enough to be involved with, like a lot of leadership groups, like you said, whether it was being the specific captain or being a part of that leadership group, or even at school, like I was probably given more leadership than I probably deserved, but more so just, you're the sporty guy and whatnot, and you kind of, revolve in those circles. But I think that's contributed largely to me having significantly greater soft skills and being able to manage people and athletes stemming from those experiences now as a coach than what I probably had have initially thought. Do you feel like you kind of learned a lot about how to manage people and kind of how to deal with different personalities through those kind of experiences, or was it more so something that you specifically kind of sought out to kind of, because you are someone who, specifically doesn't offend too easily. So I could assume that, you may have had to construct your approach to certain individuals in which you've coached a little bit more, with a little bit more reservation at times.
A little bit more tact. It's funny, man. I actually gave up the opportunity to be school captain in grade 7 of my primary school because I'd prefer to be sports captain. That's how much I was indebted into sport, man. Like I was like, nah, I'm not interested in being the school leader. I'll just be the sports leader. That's fine. But yeah, man, I think like, hindsight bias or hindsight 2020 is 2020 in that I learned a lot of things coming up as a kid, like resilience. And I was very, very, very privileged in my upbringing. There's no doubt about that. But I mean, to learn to fail as an individual in the UK on your own with no support around you, as some random dude that's been, slung into a team of English lads that are, would like to play games and push the guy who's new and all this sort of stuff. You build a lot of resilience without knowing that that's what's happening until later on. Yeah. And like, yeah, I mean, you asked me to look back on it, man. I for sure know that there were players that I would really get at aggressively. Teammates, and then there's other ones where it would be a hand on the shoulder and be like, hey dude, like this is what we need, so like the communication variability was very, very high on a sporting field, similar to even like you knew your opposition. I know if I poke this guy in this way, I'll probably get this result, but I also know that this guy doesn't respond to that. So yeah, having the ability to, I suppose, like be malleable in various situations, but also to different personalities as a coach is super important.
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that when people kind of ask me, whether it's, obviously the coaching industry or amateur in and of itself anyway is relatively saturated these days. I'm not sure how it was specifically when you kind of founded, Flex Success with Liz, but I do get relative questions. I think maybe being a potentially a little bit of a younger guy, even though some people seem to think I'm in my 30s, I'm 26 for everybody listening, and having kind of been, it's an interesting kind of position to be in for me personally, because I've been in the industry since very young, well, not specifically in like a coaching sense, but I was that kid in 2015 and 2014 that was posting this workout and doing this thing on YouTube and whatnot, and that was essentially when I was injured with footy, and basically my entire friendship group was like, what are you doing, what are you and through that kind of process, I feel like I've seen a lot and experienced a lot and seen a lot of people come and go with regards to whether it's them as a personal athlete or them as a coach. And even though I'm still, I feel like in the early days of my kind of career, I guess you would call it, I feel like I've seen a lot. And I think a lot of what I see with regards to comparatively from 2015 to now being in 2025 is obviously a numerous amount of things have changed with regards to social media, but specifically just the idea of coaching seems to be very different to what it was when I first was introduced to bodybuilding coaching in of itself. So 2015, it seemed to be something that, at least for me, it may be very different for you, but for me, it was this is something where very few select individuals kind of coach a large cohort of bodybuilders, and they're coaching really high level competitors or amateur competitors within, Australia and whatnot. And it wasn't really revolved around beginners or, first time athletes or whatnot. Whereas it seems to be, which is good, I suppose, in business entirely, like you're both getting greater information. So also greater good information, but there's also the downside of, having to deal with greater negative information or suboptimal information. But have you seen, like, what would you say the comparison is between, 2015 or when did Flex Success, was it Flex Success first, or were you just coaching by yourself before you bring Lizzie, or you guys co-founded it together?
Yeah, no, and so it was, Flex is around about, I think it's 2016 we claim. No, that's 9 years. That's about right. Yeah. Because Liz and I have been together for 11 years. It was probably a bit earlier than that. I was maybe even in 2014. It was pretty close to when we first got together. Around about 5 or 6 months in. In that, I worked for a supplement company. I got asked, that supplement company was different to the rest at the time in that it was, the stores that I worked in at least was very much like education first, sales by default of enjoying the customer service experience, right? And by default of that, then a lot of people would ask a lot of questions about nutrition and, do you offer support for this? I was also online space was kind of like starting to evolve then where, there was more education going in online. And then there was also a lot of like poking the bear and like asking questions of people or telling people that they don't know what they're talking about. And I was one of those pests doing that. So then I had more people just sort of, I suppose, asking me about nutrition. It was just general and also performance. And then there was a little bit of bodybuilding specificity to that. Liz was working as a personal trainer and she would get the same, hey, can you help me outside of just training me for an hour? And I was like, well, no, not right now, but maybe later. So then Liz is the go-getter. I'm the person who ponders and wonders for a while. And she just said, let's just like offer this as an outside service collectively together. We came up with Flex Success. And the rest is kind of history, man, because it kind of just took off that, we had a few clients and then a few more clients and then a few more clients. And, that's the way it was. But, like the space has certainly changed. The difficulty, I suppose, in like trying to quantify what the change is, or if it's changed that much, is that like the online space has come a long, long way in the last 15 years, just by virtue of progression of anything, like I think back then, man, it was probably fucking MySpace and Facebook and maybe Instagram. And now there's Twitter and then there's this and like, there's things that I don't even know exist, man. There's so many of them, right? Yeah. So like when I came up, a lot of the coaches that I was aware of were actually like in person. Like I was looking at people that were coaching people in person. It wasn't even an online thing. It was relatively new or novel for us to offer it online at the time. There was a couple of guys that were doing it reasonably well. And like big name people like, Lane Norton had sort of come into the space of coaching online. But there wasn't a lot of like international coaches coaching international clients. So I don't know if now it's just that like there were people obviously doing it, because I've heard stories of Milos saying that he would fax people diets. Like it was obviously happening, but the opportunity to do it at scale was limited. And now we obviously have it like put in our face. So like we see it all the time. We always see people coaching somebody. So but I feel like it might actually be flipping around a little bit now. Like, it went from here are the select group of coaches that within your area. And now there's like a shit ton of people trying to saturate the market because they just see money. And then all of the ones that sought coaching for financial success seem to have just disappeared.
Yeah. And
the ones that were like doing really good coaching are still doing really good coaching.
Yeah. I think like the success, as people say, the success leaves clues, and that in and of itself is related to coaching businesses as well. I feel like I've even had or coached athletes, for a period of times that have also then, began coaching, whether it's, general population or whatnot. I think like there's also this really, I don't know if you agree, but there's also this, I feel like there's this emphasis on, if you are being a coach, you need to be a good coach. You need to somehow become a prep coach to also almost like validate your ability. Whereas like I've had conversations with athletes that have kind of potentially, just touched on how do I attract more of these or of the athletes, whereas obviously having the knowledge, but then having, I guess, at times the luck to be able to impart that knowledge on a specific individual that can then represent that on stage, which I've been very lucky to have. But also just like with regards to the athletes themselves, like they seem to have such an influx because there's so many people wanting coaching. There seems to be such an influx of quick success. So whether it's someone comes on to coach, someone starts coaching from a financial perspective, because from the outset, it seems, very lucrative. It seems like you just get to do whatever you want all the time. And, it's a nice life, which at times it is, and it does afford you good things, but it's also, as we've spoken about, in person, it's a different story once you're involved in it. But I've had conversations with athletes around, I feel like because of the access that people who potentially don't have those hard skills or that legitimate baseline knowledge, they get this influx of clients, they get this influx of success, and there isn't any desire or necessity for them to actually then therefore learn or extract that knowledge or baseline information. And then it gets to a point in which you can't really rely on those soft skills anymore, where you've created a little community, or you've told someone how good they are, or you've been best friends. Like, you can be best friends with athletes, but if you're not getting the results, they're eventually going to go somewhere else. And it kind of does fizzle out. And I think I probably would have been that way if I had really early onset success. Like, I had obviously through school, I was really interested in PD, specifically revolving around my actual ACL injury and the recoverability around that. That's kind of what kickstarted my initial desire to, learn about these things and whatnot. But I feel like the just wave of success that someone can have, being 1 week having no clients and then 10 weeks later having 70 or 80, there isn't any desire. And then it eventually, you see that person kind of dissipate, because obviously there isn't the results that are, perpetuating further clients, and that kind of dies off. And I think that's probably what you're referring to in regards to seeing that kind of influx, but then also the cream does rise to the top via results,
Yeah, also for the people to get those, 50 or 60 clients relatively quickly, the tactics required to do that generally, encourage the wrong client. They attract clients that are also looking for quick success. And you and I both know that. I mean, you can get quick success in fat loss and relatively quick success in muscle gain, but you can't get quick success if you want long-term either way, because like by default of the name, it's long-term, So I think you're right in that if you come up to, stardom very quickly, if you actually have a care for the client, eventually you'll do much better. Like, if you have a genuine interest in the client's best result, which is therefore then your best result as a coach, you'll always do well. Like, people ask, how do I become a better coach? I'm like, just be a good person. Like, that's a good start, and have a really, 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 really high, level of expectation around customer service. And it sounds weird to say customer service, I think, in coaching, but customer service isn't just like telling people that they look nice, like you said. It's understanding their needs. It's understanding the risk profiles. It's providing good communication. It's giving them an open door if they think that they want to talk to you about something. It's also them knowing boundaries. Like, all of that is a part of your customer service,
Yeah. I think, as you said, I think it's interesting because I've even spoken to George about it in the past, and he's someone who I feel like is very much on the side of there's not enough hard skills, and then I'm on the kind of the side of there's not enough soft skills. But I can see both a lot of the times. But I think I
think they can coexist.
Yeah, I think they can, and I think there's probably too much of both, to be honest. I think given that so much of the desire to be a coach of XYZ athlete is based on the financial, progression of oneself. I'm sure it feels fantastic to go from hitting a hammer 12 hours a day to sitting on a computer, 4 to 5 to 6 hours and, making 3 times the amount or whatnot. But again, if you're just driven by that financial, outcome, there isn't that desire to say, when I was coming through with initial coaching, if I had an athlete that I didn't know something that they'd asked, because I wasn't driven by the financial progression, as nice as it is, I wasn't driven by that. I would then go and seek out that information, whether it was from an external source, whether it was from my own, readings and knowledge. And I think I was very lucky to be able to have that where, from essentially 2017 to 2021, I was going from 0 athletes to 10 athletes to 0 athletes to 10 athletes. And that was just building those kind of hard and soft skills. And then I obviously got the opportunity to coach, athletes to stage, and, the rest is history, as you say. But I think if anyone is wanting to really have success as a coach, especially in an industry that it is as saturated as what it is developing the ability to not be driven financially, because it is kind of, you can get greedy with it. Like even myself at times, back in 2022 and early 2023, I kind of had to pull myself aside and say, look, as great as it is to take on these people and that people and whatnot, is it contributing to that, service that I can give, or is it going to eventually come back to bite me? And I think a lot of people probably don't have the ability to have that foresight where they're like, very much same with PDs, less often is more.
Yeah. And sometimes you're going to try more and you might find it's better, but you may also find that it comes at a cost,
Yeah.
Because dude, they're actually pretty like for like thing. Like, 500 megs is pretty good. 1,000 megs is a bit better. Maybe 1,500 megs is a little bit better. But then you get to 2,000 megs and you're like, well, there's just the consequence of having to pin this all the time. That's time. Yeah. Then there's maybe the soreness. And then maybe you actually get like a lot of like shitty, like other values in your blood work. And you're like, oh, I'm much bigger, but I don't really enjoy it. Yeah. It's like I earn a little bit more money and that's afforded me some more freedoms. Fantastic. A little bit more. Or now I've got a little bit of fun stuff. Like I don't have to look for the cheapest accommodation when I holiday. Cool. That's nice to do. But then it gets to a point where you're like more money is just more money. It's not more happiness. But I can tell you right now, like doing more clients or taking on clients that I don't really gel with, that makes me dislike my day. It doesn't just make me earn more money. It makes me dislike my day. Like I'd rather live happy with a little bit less than fucking annoyed and frustrated with a little bit more,
Yeah, that's one thing for me as well. Like just the fulfillment of opening up someone's programming, knowing they've done, what you've essentially constructed and asked of them and whatnot, not having to, one thing that I actually do really enjoy is, and have had the, been fortunate enough to do, is kind of have, whether it's because I'm a little bit younger or they've seen me kind of come through the ranks, both with regards to the physique extending all the way back to kind of 2015 and 2014 when I was wearing stringers and fucking taking photo shoots out front of fucking, whatever I was doing. But you've got that kind of almost inadvertent backlog of progression where I didn't realize it was creating that across the timeline, but it has done so. And I've been fortunate enough to kind of take on really enthusiastic young guys or younger guys and kind of teach them how to be bodybuilders. They have the kind of, they potentially might have the genetic potential, but they just haven't been kind of directed in the right way prior, or they don't know what's required of them from an actual habit perspective or even kind of thought process and whatnot. And I've really enjoyed that, but it does get to a point where having to teach someone how to exist as an athlete at times can be very draining. And I do enjoy coming on, opening up, a sheets and just saying, oh, it's been done. It's really, it's nice. It's been done. But yeah, I mean, instead of just taking on more athletes, you could essentially just hire a coach, in which you have done with George and a bunch of others. And I've now done
that also doesn't come without consideration, man. Like we've had, we've been lucky enough. Like I think our biggest team at one stage was around about 8. Now our team is, is 5. So it's 4, 5 including admin. But and like the team now is better than it's ever been. And that's because we've got the right team, the right people with the right motivations. I think the problem with the coaching industry is that people look at it the same as like other industries where they're always like thinking that you must have more next year. And like, it's very difficult to determine what more is. It's like you are like, if you're your own coach, you're already the CEO technically.
Yeah.
So like, how do you earn more money next year? Oh, you take on more clients. Okay. And then how do you earn more money after that? Well, time is a valuable resource. Like, can you just keep taking on more clients? Well, no. So maybe if you're better, you can increase your price. All right, there's a way to escalate income. Maybe you can start to sell some things on the side, but then your messaging is very different. And like, I'm not of somebody who seeks constant progression in coaching from a dollars perspective.
Yeah.
I'll seek progression in other aspects of my life that coaching affords me the opportunity to do, and like, man, like there is this weird culture within, especially even like UK coaches, to say that you have this like mythical or magical number of, I coach X amount of clients and I go to every show. Like there's these two like weird things go on in the UK where this is like the measure of success. Not how many of your clients out of your 100 actually do well. Like 10%, good on you. Like, but they're the 10% that people see too, right? And then we all live in this echo chamber of, you like bodybuilding, so you follow bodybuilding stuff. You only see bodybuilding stuff. Then you only see successful bodybuilding stuff because no one posts the shit on Instagram, like good stories don't look as nice as a picture. So I think like some people need to remember that like when they're looking online at successful coaches too, that they are literally only seeing just the sprinkles most of the time. And then there's a lot of shit that goes on behind the scenes that people would probably be mortified by.
Yeah. I mean, without naming any names, I mean, that does happen in Australia as well, where, you'll go to a show and you have those kind of marquee athletes that are representing X coach or X team or whatnot. And then you'll see someone walk out onto stage and they'll say, and coached by that same person. And you're like, I've never seen that person before. I've never seen them posted. I've never heard of them. And they don't look up to par. And I think people do fall for that. I think honestly, probably more so on the female side of things. I think a lot of females tend to fall for like what's kind of in or what's cool or, who's kind of doing X, Y, and Z. And they see those maybe 10 to 11 athletes within 100 or 80 or whatever it is, what, enormous number it is. And they see that they're high quality. But what they probably don't realize is that a lot of those athletes of that 10 to 12 would have been high quality athletes, potentially even higher quality with a coach that obviously has it, the greater capacity to achieve those things for those athletes. So, I think we've spoken about it before. I think even you may have said it to me at one point that I would measure, not all the time, but I would measure a coach's ability via how they can achieve, what they can achieve for someone who probably isn't the genetic elite or doesn't have the most, effective situation or genetic capacity or, prehistory in bodybuilding. Because, as you coach more and more people, you obviously attract better and better athletes. And I've been lucky enough, for that to be essentially how it's gone as well. But it can be very often that, you can have someone who probably isn't, and, you have that conversation with them that they may not be, the next Mr. Olympia, but they can still achieve X, Y, and Z. And you'll see, they may not be as impressive as the athlete in which you've, put up on stage that is genetically predispositioned to do very well, but where they've come from to where they are now and what they've achieved over that timeline is substantial and potentially even more substantial than, the genetic elite.
If anyone got Phil Heath when he was 25, they probably would have had success. Well, not probably, they definitely would have. Like that dude had to sniff some stuff and work hard, and he's going to look the way that he looks. But one of the other things that I think is like a really good telltale sign of a coach's ability, and then the ability here is probably a combination of, you certainly have to have more hard skills like understanding physiology and all the rest of it, but then also some soft skills because different people behave differently, amazingly. And that is like getting success with various physiques, different age groups, and also maybe even different sex. Like I started out coaching men and women and had success in both. I just preferred to coach men, so I just went that way. And also that was where most of my, inquiries came from. I've coached tall guys, I've coached short guys, I've coached black guys, I've coached white guys, and they all come with some different considerations, not specifically because they are that, they're just all different people, right? Although I would say there seems to be a bit of a common thread with Nigerian guys. But again, this is an echo chamber of what I see, and also the elite tier, so who knows? But it seems they grow muscle very easily, but really suck at fat loss metabolically. It's quite interesting. So if you're looking at somebody and they're posting just like what look to be like very similar people over and over and over again, then that's not that interesting to me. What's interesting to me is seeing the progression of the coach's skill set across multiple different types of humans.
Yeah, I think I remembered what I was essentially going to say, in that judging the coach on all of their athletes as opposed to not just the ones that you see with X amount of followers or X amount of, social media kind of clout, as you would say. But, one thing that I think is definitely a good point to touch on, kind of leading into our next conversation, is getting more out of less, or less is more, as we briefly touched on. And with regards to that being training, potentially obviously PEDs, whether it's, nutrition, and a lot of people will probably say, what do you mean getting more out of less with regards to nutrition? But specifically with our, coaching experience, I've obviously been someone who I can grow quite significantly on lower food. I obviously then need to diet harder as well. But in the past, if I hadn't been, experienced those things or gone through those kind of assessments over time and really understood my physique, I'd just be still eating, 4,500 calories, 5,000 calories, and just continuing to sit at 120 kilos or whatever I was. So when someone says to you, why am I not on X? Or, you might not have that anymore given the quality of athletes in which you coach, but, that'll be something that I think myself and other coaches will deal with. You'll have an athlete performing really well, but they've been exposed to other sort of discourse around PEDs or whatnot. And you hear someone say, hey, this person's taking X amount of PEDs or X amount of whatever. Why am I not doing that? What would you say to them if that, you were going to talk about less is more?
I mean, my short answer would be because you don't need that much. Because by virtue of, progress, if you're making progress in the visuals and on the scale, then none of the factors that would typically manipulate that are necessary. You don't need to escalate the farm. You don't need to escalate the food. I actually have a note on a lot of my guys when it says like nutrition strategy, current nutrition strategy, it says sufficient to grow. Whereas in the past, I may have written surplus. And I write sufficient to grow because what I've learned over time is that the surplus is a moving target for even each individual. In that, like by default of the concept of like, what do you require to grow muscle optimally? A calorie surplus. You need more food to go into the system than the system currently needs to survive at its baseline. Makes sense, that makes perfect sense. However, like the quantity of calories required to do that is vastly different depending on total muscle mass, depending on total drug load, depending on maturity of that physique too, like how long have they been growing for, depending on the length of time between competitions, depending on, current level of stress, whether that be psychological, emotional, financial, you name it. All of these environmental stresses have an impact on a person's efficiency to take nutrients from outside, put it in their mouth, and then use it appropriately. Because like if you're a highly stressed individual, your energy efficiency is down. You burn through fuel unnecessarily. So now you eat a shit ton of it just to account for it. Or if you're ADD, this is another one. Like that's an inefficient energy user as an individual. They burn through fuel like for no tomorrow. And funnily enough, man, like people like have this people put a badge right on their shoulder of like, I get to eat 5,000 calories to grow. Like that's not really that much of a successful thing for me. Like the equivalent, to use the ADD person again, would be like saying, I'm going to take this race car, I'm going to put it on the racetrack, and not only am I going to like do a relatively similar speed, you and I, Taylor, but I'm going to burn through 2.5 times the amount of fuel. Like, okay, like why is this good? So the short of it is like, you only need the amount of food that you need. You only need the amount of drugs that you need. And one common thread that I'll say on a lot of these podcasts is like, for what benefit, at what cost is always my question of where do I change things? If I dial up the drugs, for what benefit, at what cost? Because there's certainly costs and there's certainly potential benefits. Same for the food, same for the training volume. And I'm of the opinion that there is going to be a period of time where proactive changes to speed the process up is probably advantageous for you. But that's going to be individually specific based on all those factors that I said before. But most of the time it should be reactive, because you should be trying to get the most out of the least. Because if you can get the most out of the least, when the least stops working, you can do just a little bit more, And then when that stops working, you can do a little bit more. And then eventually you'll find that there'll be a dial point for each of these like vectors of input, where when you turn it that little bit too far, you actually no longer get more, but you actually get more plus some negative. And then the negative counterbalances the wins, and then eventually it starts to snowball. And food's a big one, and drugs are a big one in that instance.
Yeah. I think one of the key components of being a great coach, or at least one that has relative success, is not only knowing when to change or when to manipulate, but also knowing when not to manipulate. And I think that's probably tougher to know when not to than to do. And that's something I've probably experienced in the past in, you could potentially, say you're taking someone through a preparation phase, and they're, you've got this rate of loss that you have to have over an allocated period of time. And, they may be starting to see a potential de-escalation of that rate of loss, yet across the timeline, you're still potentially ahead of that. Now, some coaches may have a knee-jerk reaction to that. Oh my God, that's slowing down, so let's pull by X amount of that is then going to contribute to greater stress, greater fatigue, whatever it may do from a psychological perspective that is relatively suboptimal, whereby potentially having the balls to be a little bit more reactive in that process, I think is where I think I've been able to have relative success with athletes, not as much as when to preemptively manipulate something, but more so reactively, because I'd rather make a decision that is concrete as opposed to a little bit more, I guess, estimated if I have the allocated time to do that. And I think knowing when not to manipulate something is probably just as, if not more, a reflection of a quality coach.
Hugely, dude. I think that is one of the things that, like, experience is unmatched in regards to, like, learning from a book versus learning in application is recognizing that, like, because there's so many times that I'll have this, that, like, may need a calorie escalation next week. And then I get to the next week and I'm like, nope.
Yeah.
And, like, I'm talking to my guys usually, like, hey man, I think you might need more food next week, but it might not. And then it's like, nope. And, like, I've had men, like, even for Kuba at the moment, I don't think we've had probably more calorie escalations than maybe 5 or 6 is my guess, since he came off comp 30 plus weeks ago. And it's just because, like, every week I'm like, there's another couple pounds, man. Now, thankfully for me, he's an incredibly patient individual. All he cares about is results. He doesn't care if he's hungry. He doesn't care if he has more food or less food. It's just like, I want results, man. So, like, make decisions based on results. But yeah, you'll get the one difficult thing for new coaches coming up is when they get the emotional client, like, man, I'm really this and I'm really this, and, like, I need this. And you're like, oof, then you need to decide, like, how much rope can you give that person before it's too far.
You can kind of fall into the pit you can kind of fall into the pitfall of, especially if you don't quite have that, I guess, self-belief in your own baseline knowledge or hard skills, where I've seen athletes, or I've seen coaches in the past that have potentially consulted with me at times, or even ones that have, been moving someone through a peak week, and they may never have peaked an athlete before. And they're like, oh, my client thinks that they need this and this. And they just do it because that's, I guess, allowing that athlete to feel better. Or, they might say, hey, bro, I haven't had changes for the last 8 weeks. When are we going to manipulate something? And having the ability to just say there isn't a need to, and not feeling as if you need to do that to keep the athlete, I think is another skill that probably a lot of people don't have, or a lot of amateur coaches probably don't have to the greatest extent. At times in the past, myself included, and just as you achieve those results, I think it's easier to definitely say, no, I have the ability, I know what I'm doing. When you don't quite have that represented, from a result standpoint, whether you're a new coach, it's a little bit harder to, you kind of work within that fine line of trying to, keep the athlete happy, but also still trusting what you know and what you believe. And I think, having the ability to just say, nope, we don't need a manipulation. There may be one, but there isn't one is something that a lot of people could probably, and athletes too, like, it's not all on the coaches. You hire someone to do a certain job, let them do that fucking job. Sometimes you're just like,
Yeah. So there's a difference between saying this is how I feel and you being manipulative of wanting to get something out of the coach. Like, you can say, hey man, I'm really hungry and I'm struggling. I don't know if there's an opportunity for me to have, like, a break here, but I might need it, versus, like, really pulling on the strings and saying, like, if I don't get this, I think I'm going to break, unless you actually think you are, like, or like, or emotionally being attached to the fact of what we said before. Oh, I saw that this person's getting refeeds every week, or, you're like, yeah, but do you like I've posted up things of my client Rory before, of, like, like eating a tremendous amount of food in the prep. Just like, yeah, but you've never sat next to Rory for 5 minutes to realize that he does as much movement in 5 minutes as you do every day, just through twitching and moving, because he's just hyper energy. Like, like, you don't know this, man. Like, you don't know that he's also a carpenter that goes up and down ladders and does 29,000 steps a fucking day. Like, in prep with no complaints, by the way. You're complaining on this, you know? So
yeah,
it's that's certainly a confidence thing I think as a coach you'll learn. But I'll also say flip this as a coach in the reverse. Experience tells you that you can make probably small deviations with very little consequence, and the person won't break. Will be much better for you if you can do that than to wait and let it happen. Because, you know, like I've you know, been a victim of, I suppose, my own you know, my own want to like really dial up efforts and dial up specifics on people, like in the past, like years ago, where I'd be like, no man, like this is the reason why, this is why I think this is the case to go and go for this. And I think we can do this next week, but I'm not sure. And then when it gets there, I'm like, nah, man, you're not ready. Like we can't do that yet. Like I can't give you the refeed, the fat loss, like you said, the rate of loss is not achieved what I've wanted yet. And then I've pushed them that bit more. And like, just because I think I could push that far doesn't mean that that individual can. And like I get caught in this like own of, if it's okay for me, it's okay for you. I don't find dieting that hard, so why should you? You know, and like, you know, don't be a skirt, whatever you want to use, whatever terminology. And then eventually they're like, oh yeah, by the way, dude, I just ate like a ton of food on the weekend. You're like, you know, shit. And who's to blame? Both, probably.
I think it's with regards to that specifically, and that kind of individual variability between, you know, personalities and people and what they've been exposed to in the past. You know, with yourself and myself, we've been exposed to, you know, prior sporting, you know, endeavors, and you know, at times those are extremely challenging, whether it's from training or commitment or whatnot. Whereby coming into the bodybuilding industry, for me, in the grand scheme of things, obviously there's times in which it's very challenging from an entire, you know, a life perspective, and it's sacrificial, and you know, there's things that you have to tweak to exist as a bodybuilder if you want to, you know, achieve what you want to achieve. But in the grand scheme of things, I don't think that it's anywhere near as challenging as running a fucking 10K or doing a fucking beep. Like I much prefer to go to the gym and get under a hack squat and do that than go and run for 3 hours on end, or do this preseason camp or whatnot. And because I think I've had that pre-exposure to that really challenging aerobic difficult outcome or difficult experience, then coming into something that is not as, or at least seems not as much at times, you know, kind of shifts my kind of goalposts as to what I deem really challenging. Whereas, you know, you then have an athlete that may on board with you, and, you know, they've sat away behind a computer screen their whole life, and they might be a little bit of a gamer or something like that or whatnot, and they don't really have that pre-exposure to hard work. So understanding that their goalposts for what's deemed to be hard work is very different to yours as an individual coach, and kind of having, again, it just kind of takes us back to that managing the athlete and understanding that, and having that foresight to go, this person may find these things really challenging, and that's fine. Like, it doesn't mean they're a worse person. It just is a different experience, different exposure, and then kind of trying to adjust things, you know, from there. But, you know, that probably leads us into what I was going to touch on next, which is the reason I want to touch on this is because there's so much, especially as I said before, with athletes or with coaches specifically, you know, deeming that to be a successful coach or a coach with validity, you need to have prepped athletes. I guess it gives you some sort of, you know, status, you know, especially if they're trying to, you know, even coach Gen Pop, they've seen, oh, they can do this for this person, so that means they absolutely be able to coach me or whatever it may be. But the individual variability of peaking athletes, and, you know, I've at times been asked to peak other athletes in which I have no data on from, you know, potential coaches that might not have, you know, done that before and whatnot. And I think I've been very lucky in probably listening to yourself quite often, and us having conversations around that as well. And there's not a lot that I actually fucking do when I'm peaking people. Like, it's very, very minimalistic for the most part, unless there is a specific need to manipulate something. And I think that's where, if you are wanting to be a prep coach or successful in prepping, understanding what is necessary to do for the specific individual, you know, in a peaking situation is probably something that it's almost like the boogeyman of prep coaches that haven't put people on stage. Are like, oh, I can get this person to stage. Now what the fuck do I do? You know, so with regards to peaking athletes, you know, what would you say, if you can be relatively general in things that you see done very bad or wrong, and things that you see that people do right?
I think the first problem most people get stuck in with peaking athletes is thinking that peak weeks are the holy grail. If you cut through the shit, right? If you're coming up as a coach and you've done pretty good, you've got somebody in like really good condition, and you've never peaked somebody before, the likelihood is that a week you're going to go, I'm just going to do what we're already doing and just watch what happens.
Yeah.
You know, because you don't know what the consequence will be if you make a change. So you actually take like a really cautious approach to that week, and you probably are very successful. Because of course you are. You've gotten them lean, like they already look good. And then as time progresses, you start to like, if you're a curious person, you think, ooh, what else is there? And then it's kind of like flexible dieting. You learn, oh, okay, like I can have some jam on my sourdough and it's probably not going to ruin my results, or some barbecue sauce on my rice or whatever it may be. And then you go, well, fuck it, I'll have barbecue sauce on everything. And then people do this with peak weeks too. They're like, well, if doing very little was good, maybe doing a lot is better. And this is kind of like, a testament to the conversation before. And then they start to just turn way too many dials at once and they have no idea what the fuck has happened.
Yeah.
So I would say like do the bare minimum to the week, but all you're realistically trying to do for peak week for me is like two primary things. Reduce stress physiologically and psychologically as much as possible, and just refuel the system moderately. Yeah. That's a very good start. If you can just do those two things, you're going to be sweet. So you can pretty much take like hydration and water and just say, keep that stable. Don't do anything to that. Super easy. Now you need to think about like, I want to refuel like energy, muscle glycogen through carbohydrates. That's I understand that is probably going to be positive to the look. It is for most individuals. To what degree is very different. Some people will require a little, some people will require a lot. But whatever strategy you choose is going to vastly impact the person's psychology. Because I might say, for example, get really nerdy on it and be like, if I push this carbohydrates in amount here and then this to there and that to there and this to there, and I change it every morning, that's going to be the best. But then this person is just like strung the fuck out because they're just constantly thinking like, what's tomorrow? What's tomorrow? What's this? Oh, I've got to cook. And then they also live their life. Like, it doesn't matter how much fuel you put in that person. That's a bad environment, So there needs to be a conversation around that. Like, what is actually feasible to change, So change the least amount possible in food types, manage energy availability through a moderate manipulation of carbohydrates, keep hydration the same, and think about your decisions and how they will affect the athlete in regards to their psychology and how easy it is for them to implement, and just coast.
Yeah.
I
think that's that kind of conversation around psychology, especially pertaining to me coaching at times first timers or whoever it may be, depending. I've coached athletes that aren't first timers that are probably a little bit more psychologically strong than some who are first timers, depending on the individual. But even just the notion around really small, minute things, like it may be, for instance, let's use the example of a first timer and we're backstage and they're sitting there and they're going, I've looked at them 10 minutes ago and nothing's changed in that 10 minutes. And they go, hey, let's have another look. I could very simply say, shut up, nothing's changed. However, that's going to contribute negatively to their psychology, which is potentially going to escalate cortisol, which is potentially going to affect the look. So if I just say, hey, you know what, let's go have another look, even though it's been 10, 15, 20, 30 minutes where I know that we've not manipulated anything, there's no visual change whatsoever, that putting them in that psychological state to kind of reaffirm any sort of doubt or self-doubt, especially as a first time. Like, I'm sure that they're, absolutely nervous beyond belief trying to, get up on stage and have Tony calling them who's someone else's name and what, whatever it may be. But even those small, really minute things can make a big difference. And I think that's, again, probably something that maybe even more successful coaches probably don't have because they've been through those things, they know what works, or at least for athletes in which they've coached in the past. But yeah, just me personally, like, I've always just wanted to at least get to that position where you would have the ability to peak someone, and just said, if they're conditioned, get them there first, focus on that, and then if there's an ability to manipulate and it not to have X negative outcome, the risk of changing this to try and achieve that, even if we don't achieve that, isn't going to end up having a really significant, effect on the look as a whole, then maybe in the past I might have manipulated something, but in the grand scheme of things, it's been, and especially with female competitors, it's been get on stage. Here's what you were having at maintenance calories, get on stage. There might be a few manipulations around certain things and whatnot, but in the grand scheme of things, like doing, again, less is more for a lot of these things. And if anyone's going to take away anything from this podcast, it's that, I think. But
I think you can also say to, I think it's actually perfectly reasonable. I mean, you should be communicating with your client. You should say, I'm 95% confident that if we do this, the result will be fantastic.
Yeah.
But if we do this, it might be a little bit better. And if you want to kind of have some fun with it, that's cool. But just know it may come at the cost of this.
Yeah.
And I think this is probably more prevalent or necessary in the pro divisions, especially in my domain. I'll speak to specifically men's bodybuilding and in all of them, classic, 2-on-2 and opens, is that there is a significant difference in regards to the expectation of fullness than there is as an amateur. You can be flat as a tack and peeled in an amateur, and then no one's really going to comment on it. You'll have some judges that will say, oh, maybe he could be a little fuller. I think half the time they don't even really know what that look is. They just think, oh, the muscle wasn't as round and poppy. Because genetically they don't have that. So cool. But in the pros, it seems to be the case that you have to be sufficiently lean, but then depending on shape and structure, you absolutely cannot afford to be flat. So sometimes for those guys, the question is, hey, I think this will be enough, but if we push just a bit more, it might spill us a little bit. You might look a little bit smoother, but you're going to come out and look massive. And you're standing next to a guy that looks, guess what, massive, because they all do, because they're the genetic elite. So you can't really afford to run in flat on pro shows, I've found. So, but again, the client should be like, you know what, man, I'd rather lose and be peeled and flat and just let them tell me that than to push the limits too far and then say to me, oh, you're a little bit off. So then it's a communication thing between the two of you.
Yeah. There also seems to be a little bit of a miscommunication or misrepresentation of what is actually truly peeled. And you think someone's trending, you're looking at their check-in photos and they're standing under relatively advantageous light and you're like, oh, this person's good. And then you'll see them get up on stage and, there can be a variety of different reasons to why they've not had the outcome in which they wanted and how they were looking relative to their social media profile or whatnot. But I think especially with my first timers or younger guys who've not competed in the past, my sole focus has just been on getting them into the highest level of condition possible, not only from that representing themselves as having the ability to do that, but also what it teaches them in that process and knowing that they can do that, they can look like that. And seems to be this weird kind of association with, oh, it's, I'm the first time athlete, I'm a junior, so I can afford to be a little bit fatter and not quite as good. Whereas, specifically with my guys at the Queensland show last year, like Josh and Brody and whatnot, we really pushed them to be really peeled, really dry. And we were on the little bit of a flatter side to kind of extract that, because obviously they're going to be going up against, especially in the open classes, guys that even if we were bursting full, you're not going to be as full or as big as. And then they get up there and the lighting's not representative of that detail at all. So I've gone, oh, for fuck's sake. But, having that ability to just get truly, truly peeled and knowing that they can do that. And now, you can get peeled. Well, it's easy to grow. So relatively, comparatively to getting peeled. So go and do that. And you kind of instill that self-belief in that athlete and it's also been nice, to see them not just kind of rest on the laurels at oh, it's my first time. I'm happy with the condition in which I'm at here. This is the best I've ever been. It's let's beat people who've competed repetitively year on year on year by achieving X condition, as long as the lighting represents that. But
I think it's understandable to not be absolutely peeled. I can understand, or I would maybe have lower expectations on a first timer to be peeled, unless they're just genetically allowed to. But I don't think that they shouldn't at least seek to try and achieve it. But then I'll contradict myself also though and say that I think being peeled is certainly a badge of honor that everybody wants to wear. There's no doubt about that. But it won't always not come at a cost for certain individuals, especially if you have asymmetrical fat patterning to the point where a particular body part just carries way more fat than what everything else does, or it's not muscular enough to look lean under lights. And if you do push at all costs, to the benefit of condition, be aware that it may not actually be the best look. The tough thing is, though, is that usually this happens to people that are under-muscled relative to the people that they're competing against. So if you're under-muscled and also not peeled, you're not going to win. So you should probably aim to get peeled. But getting extra peeled may afford you, a less of a chance of being successful, because you might have to lose some shit and run it really flat. So it's a tough one, man. But I think like clients need to learn, and also coaches need to be less judgmental of every client that gets on stage, because they don't know the story of that individual. And some people, man, just don't lose body fat in certain spots, or like I said, the muscle's just not big enough, or the striations aren't deep enough,
Yeah. Like, as you've said before, even like relative skin texture of different type of individuals, different ethnicities, all plays a part. So it's not as if,
and that changes per body part too, man.
Yeah.
I shared it ages ago. There's like a really, really cool picture of a guy who does cadavers on Instagram. So like human body parts. And he shows the different thickness in the dermis versus the epidermis of the skin at varying parts on the body. So it was like, like if you strip away the fat layer, what is left in actual skin, and like on the inside of a bicep, it's going to be very different to than what it is, say, on the lower back or on the subscap. So like the pinch, and we know if you've ever done pinches don't ever get to a certain level on certain body parts. You can get a bicep to 1.5 mils, but you're probably never going to get a subscap to that. You might get it to 4. Yeah. So like the relative like body fat is the same, but the look is very different. And then, glutes are a really interesting one. Like some people have like really finger deep glute like striations. The muscles, if you stripped off all the fat, for whatever reason, there's a large ripple. But then, some other individuals, it's almost like there's no ripples at all, or it's covered by like a tendinous sheath or a fascial sheath to the point where it hides it. You see this in abdominals as well. And if that's the case, man, you need to realize that that's your genetic limitation, and you probably shouldn't be seeking fucking like, Nathan Wallace level glutes, because you're never going to get them.
Yeah. Again, it's like you said with that badge of honor, like for whatever reason, the glutes seem to have taken the title of like the badge of honor of conditioning, whereby I've even seen athletes that, have been coached by other coaches, their physique at a certain point in which their glutes may not be as advantageous from a composition standpoint. Their overall physique was really good relative to stage, yet they then pushed for that, or attempted to push for that glute look, and the rest of the physique kind of whimpered around it, and then they end up getting on stage not being in a position. So even just people having the understanding of like knowing where your limitations are from a composition perspective, and with regards to certain body parts, and not kind of sacrificing your physique for the sole purpose of, as nice as it is to have walnut ass, for the sole purpose of getting that, because it just may not come at times, and then you end up just being smaller and relatively similar composition with probably even less glutes.
And here's some advice for some first timers too: is don't set up expectations that you can't uphold in person. So, and what I mean by that is the pictures that you put online are what people are judging you for every week. Then they get one chance to judge you on stage. And if you show up not even remotely close to that, because you've doctored them to a degree that, it gives off this illusion that you're really lean, you're only setting yourself up for failure, man. Like, go the other way. Like, make yourself look a little bit fat and shit online. And caveat here is if you're trying to sell business and you're using your body as a billboard, I get it. But also like appreciate the man that like it happens to the to the experience and the best of us, like with regards to trying to eke out that last little bit. Again, like in the pro division, it's really tough, man, because like you'll have an athlete who'll be told you need to be bigger, but also like you weren't lean enough through the glutes. It's like, yeah, well, we pushed for that glute bit because you knew you were going to ask for it. It cost us 4 kilos of fullness. And then it took us 2 weeks to get that fullness back, and they looked really good. But still, they're not peeled. But genetically, this person has never had those glutes peeled before. And they just, they don't seem to go there, like they get really, really close. And then it just is like the rest of the physique just starts to take off. And you're like, whoa, I need to catch this before it's too late. So, it happens over.
How have you found, obviously, when you started out with Reflex Success, how have you found the transition from coaching? I mean, obviously you still coach plenty of amateur bodybuilders, but now you've had the ability through results and through success to coach professionals and also take amateurs, which I would probably feel would be more fulfilling even, than having the ability of professionals or already professionals seeking you out. But having that ability to take an athlete from an amateur to a professional, which you've done obviously several times, but how do you kind of view the industry as a whole now from an amateur standpoint, or amateur coaching versus coaching amongst pros? Because for me, looking on the outside in for many, many years, I always wondered, why didn't someone like a Kuba or someone like a Samson or whoever, obviously he's coached by his missus, so that's a little bit different, but why did these bodybuilders or these more popular guys go to kind of the Chris Acetos and the Miloses, and why didn't they kind of, or it seems to be trending that way, but why didn't they seek out the Dean McKillops or the, Joe Jeffries or whoever? Why was that not a thing, and how is it kind of transitioned to being a thing now?
I think proof of concept is confidence for most of these guys. I think a lot of top tier like pros also think you either have had to, that somebody who hasn't taken somebody there doesn't understand it. Yeah. So there's a bit of a fear there, like, even though, like, again, like, I have no idea of like what's on their books now, but maybe in the past, maybe someone like a Chris Aceto that used to have 50 clients, maybe now he has 5. I have no idea. But, maybe out of the 50, 5 of them were pros, and they saw pretty good success for those. But then the other 40 were all average. I don't know. This is just a hypothetical. But the pros see the pros, so the pros go to where the pros see the pros.
Yeah.
There's been a shift, I suppose, in what you could classify as like the IQ lifter. And you got people like, like John Jewett and Kuba and these guys that are like are coming out and saying, like, this is why I program. This is why I take these drugs. This is why I do this. So it's a little bit more of like an IQ approach. And those guys seem to be interested in also IQ-based coaches. Kind of makes sense. But like, you'll hear a lot of rhetoric with like some of the older, bigger guys. Like, they might, I'm lucky in that I've competed before, but they might look at the information and go, yeah, look, it's good, but he just doesn't understand that I'm different.
Yeah.
Like, you are, but you aren't, and the chances are that if you come at it from an educated perspective, there's less chance of fucking up badly. But then experience will also teach you that they are a little bit different, and like the requirements for food and refeeding and all this kind of stuff is a bit different. But I think it's just a proof of concept thing. I mean, I've had a friend of mine coach a pretty top tier pro behind the scenes, fixed a lot of shit that a previous coach had fucked him up with. And then at the last minute, like when they were kind of like going to talk about their prep into a show, he went, I'm going to go to this coach. Just FYI now that I'm fixed. And he did it. He literally said, because I've always just thought it would be, I want to see what's behind that closed door that's currently, there. Like there's this elusive nature to this, like, ooh, what does a Milos do? What did a Matt Jansen do? Like, is the success because they do something different, or is it just because it is? And the only way I'll know is if I go there.
Yeah. That's honestly, like, with regards to coaching more of those athletes, it's kind of cool to see, not that I've had anyone turn pro as of yet, which hopefully will change very, very soon. That's the plan. And that's kind of what we spoke about before. I actually was going to touch on that in regards to that financial, when you see that, the people are trying to progress financially, and that seems to be a very, or one of the only ways that certain coaches or certain businesses seem that they can progress is, how am I going to financially improve? Whereas if you're looking for fulfillment, I'd be much happier earning X amount less and having this athlete turn pro and this athlete turn pro. And that's where I feel like I could continue to improve, is just in that fulfillment. And then obviously those athletes, for whatever reason, I don't know why, I didn't used to be this way, but I find such greater fulfillment in seeing the people that I coach, or friends or family, achieve their goals than I do myself. Like, I feel like if I was to do it myself, I'd be like, sweet, now what? Whereas I feel like, I don't know why that is, but just the ability to take those people to those places seems to be, or would be extremely fulfilling, I'm sure, especially, like yourself, with having worked with, the likes of, Alex Connors and those types for many, many years and whatnot. But it is, as well, it seems to be, as I've prepped more of those type of athletes, or, the Canes and Jamie Skippins and whatnot, which is extremely enjoyable, it's also, I found that there's at times potentially less availability for me to actually do something. And we've spoken about this before, whereas I may have someone who's trained, who's got got good genetics and they've inquired, they're really enthusiastic. And I know that I have the ability to make a very large impact on this person's progression over a long period of time. And that gives me probably even more fulfillment than just kind of telling someone what not to do or how to do something potentially a little bit more optimally. And that's where I've found like a really strange balance over the last kind of year is like, obviously there's that person that's getting up on stage and, you've developed that relationship with them and they're obviously really good from a representation standpoint because they're obviously a high quality athlete. But then how much ability have you had? So much so that I've had literal consults with athletes who are quite good from an amateur Australian standpoint. And all they've essentially wanted is, I want you to just manage my PEDs and do these things, or, and it's like, that doesn't fulfill me. Like, or they just want reinforcement of what they've already been doing wrong. And you don't really have, as great it would look from the outset, you don't really have the ability to do anything. Whereas having the ability to bring someone from X and take them to Y, which may be from first timer to pro, that just seems to be an extremely fulfilling thing that, if you were able to achieve that. And that's specifically the goal for myself as well. But do you find that to be the case when you do have, athletes that you potentially bring on board? There seems to be a little bit less for you to do, maybe because of their ability or just who they are as a person. And do you potentially get more fulfillment or enjoyment out of building someone up or constructing them over a larger period of time with potentially more ability to actually, manipulate things?
I thoroughly enjoy seeing the progress of somebody from, a potentially very good amateur with pro potential also to then becoming a pro, winning that, and then also seeing that potential realized even further. That is very, very cool to see. And like you play a major role in that happening. So like it really does feel like this team, effort in that, holy shit, like look what we've achieved in the last 5 years. So from a fulfillment perspective, yes. From a pro perspective, like I see more opportunity to do small things to get large results in pros. Like there's so many frustrations when I listen to guys say certain things and I just think, oh, like the answer to that is actually very fucking easy. Like what you think it is not it. It's super easy. And like I could just go in and do this, this, and this, and imagine what you could be with just taking away some of the silliness, Would it be fulfilling? Yes. Not as fulfilling? No. Would it be incredibly like fun though? And it is, to watch these guys progress because like they are the genetically elite. Yeah, it is, man. Like, like you're like, oh, I dialed that shit up and look what happened. Like, oh, okay. Like it's like turning the dial up on the excitement factor probably, but not so much on the fulfillment factor in that, until they get to the point where they like obviously like do very well in a show. So like it's about like I really like both. I will say this though, if you've got financial goals, don't try and become a pro coach because it's probably going to cost you more money than it will make you money, unless you're willing to forego your ethics and then use that as an opportunity to leverage every man and his dog for like programs and stuff like that. Sure, if you want to go down that route, have at it. But I still maintain the same level of client quantity that I'm willing to do. And if I add a pro in, then I'm probably going to have more costs. And there's also obviously a lot higher expectation on success. So like it comes with added stress. For me, I like it, but
Yeah, that was, I know we're running a bit over time. I'll try and keep it relatively short, but that was another thing that I was going to touch on relatively briefly is how have you developed the ability over, since the inception of Flex Success to manage your own psychological state while dealing with a various amount of personalities that can ask or can inadvertently pull X from you or Y from you relative to, your own kind of psychological, obviously you're someone who is, relatively, stable from a psychological perspective, but how have you found, I feel like it's a very push-pull, like knowing when to give and when giving is probably not going to achieve anything, and also knowing when to pull. But how have you developed that kind of balance over that timeline in which you've been coaching?
Focusing less on the number of clients and focusing more on quality of life and service to the client is a massive one, I think. You know, not living in fear of not doing enough by doing too much is a big one. Like, you know, you're a client of mine. Recently, I sent out like a quick little questionnaire just to sort of get a gauge back on, you know, experience of my clients, whether or not I'm giving enough, whether or not I'm open enough, whether or not I'm judgmental, whether or not, you know, even they think that I should be allowed to take a week or two off in a year. And, you know, and what do I do to achieve that without them being disappointed? So it's a customer service question, you know. And what you'll probably find 9 times out of 10 is that your expectations you place on yourself are greater than that of the client if you do a really good job. So you can probably relax a little bit on thinking that you need to be there 24/7, but understanding that it's incredibly important to have boundaries for both yourself and the quality and the client's benefit as well. In that, if I was available 24/7, as some people will claim to be, somehow they respond while they're asleep, I don't know. But even if I was available from, you know, like 6 a.m. to 10 p.m. If the client by knee-jerk reaction just constantly then is asking you questions because they just get the answers from you, you're not helping them. They're becoming codependent. Well, they're becoming dependent, but you're also becoming codependent because then you feel like you have to answer them. So having clear boundaries around how people ask questions, on what platforms they ask questions, at what times they ask questions, what are appropriate questions, and then also for you understanding, like, as a coach, like, where does your workload, you know, produce the best results? I know personally that I can do like 3 really heavy days of check-ins, and I quite enjoy them because I get a roll on. But then I want to have, you know, 1 or 2 slightly less intense check-in days, because then that allows me the opportunity to do maybe some administration work, or to do something fun, or, you know, to you know, read up on some stuff that I want to touch up on from education perspective. And then I also know that it's important for me to have at least a couple of days just to sort of zen out and not do too much. If I didn't know these things, then I would constantly just burn the candle. And it's probably going to be one of those things of discovery, just like we've spoken about earlier. You know, like doing 50 sets a week is probably pretty good. You can probably do 55 though. So do 55 and see what happens. But if you get to 60 and you realize that your life is starting to fucking crumble, like, you've found your limit. Dial it back.
Yeah. Thursdays are my saving grace. Monday through to Wednesday nearly kills me, and I get to Thursday, brings me back to life by Friday. So it's definitely just managing those things. But then again, like, you know, very similarly, you can even have thoughts along, oh, I'm not doing anything Thursday. Like, I've got all of this extra space where I could be helping these people, or, you know, coaching these people, but then having the foresight to know that, is this X amount of dollars going to contribute whatsoever to my ability to coach the rest of these people? Because now I'll be fatigued. Psychologically, I'll be fatigued. You know, I think, again, just kind of trends into that kind of foresight of again, less is more.
Yeah.
Finally,
and like, just quickly, if you are going to coach people in competitions, you do have to understand that you need to think about which days are maybe busy for you too, because when it gets to peak weeks and all the rest of it, by default, you're going to be probably working every day, but then you're also going to have the weekend. So, you know, like if you're used to having lots of clients on a Saturday and a Sunday as like general population clients, and then it gets to like season and you've got like 10 guys or 10 girls to peak, it doesn't mean that you should then say to all of your other clients, like, hey, like, you're forgotten about for the next week, unless of course you have an agreement, which is cool. Like, this is the beautiful thing about coaching, is you communicate with your clients and you decide what is the best for everyone, right? But like, I think about that. So like, that's why I have like a lot of my competitors for like the season coming up have always been on a Friday, because in my brain, I like thinking day 1 is Saturday, which will probably be comp day. So like, I'm always at least going to be a week ahead when I get to peak week. And then I'm just going to check them in every day, and then it's still on schedule. And then as I got more, I'm like, all right, well, now I need to move some of them to another day because I can't do them all on Friday. So I was like, well, what day like makes sense to me there? Like, all right, I like a Monday, or I like a Tuesday. And I'm also the same as you. Thursday is my day of, if I want to just go for a bit of a longer walk in the morning, I can, because I don't have to do as much on a Thursday, you know?
Yeah.
I can chill.
Yeah. We could do a whole podcast around the management of a prep season or whatnot. Like, I feel, you know, ever since it's gone above kind of 4 athletes per season, 5 athletes per season, it probably more so on my part. And again, probably having that greater expectation of myself and my service than the athletes even do, you know, even if they do hold that to lofty standards, which I would hope. But, you know, I feel like you go into some sort of cave of humanity for, you know, a period of 4 to 5 weeks, and you come out the other side and you're like, how have I made it here? Like I generally don't understand how, you know, the management of time and stuff it just seems to be a different kind of existence through competition season. It's a little bit daunting, but it's also become quite exciting now that I've, you know, been through, you know, kind of the last 4 or 5 of, you know, maybe 3 or 4 years of that, and you just get a little bit better at managing your time over time, and it becomes less daunting.
Yeah, systems are important.
A trivial question for you before we wrap up. If you were to have 3 dinner guests, either dead or alive, fictional or non-fictional, so it could be Bugs Bunny if you wanted, who would they be and why?
No, I'll disappoint people. I'm not really a fictional character person. This is how boring my whole life when I was a kid even was sport, man. That's all I did was watch. I'll watch golf, I'll watch lawn bowls, I'll do anything. Look. Yeah, I mean, you know what? I don't know if I'd have him at a table. I don't know if I'd find him that interesting as a person. He was my favorite footballer, but yeah, I wouldn't find him that interesting as a person, I don't think. This would change with time, but I'm going to go for, I would have someone who I think was like influential, so that they would then maybe change their approach to who they communicate with. Because and also someone who's very conversational. So I think someone like a Joe Rogan would be smart in that choice. So he's a smart choice. Not necessarily someone that interests me personally, but he's obviously very good at conversation. And I'm not a conversation starter. I'm more of a person who is, I'm not a passenger to conversation, but I certainly respond better when somebody else leads it. I'm not a leader of conversation. Like you've done an incredibly good job of this. I would not do such a good a job when I'm by myself.
It's interesting because I was always that friend in the friendship group that was like, I'll insert myself maybe once or twice, and I'll just listen to what everyone else is saying. So, yeah.
Put me in front of a crowd, and I'll talk for as long as you need me to. Ask me questions, I'll talk for as long as I need me to. But to engage conversation is just not really my thing. So I'd put that person in there. Oh man, who else would I put in there? Someone who's completely different, but incredibly smart and interesting, although his speed of conversation may frustrate me. And that would be someone like a Sam Harris. I find him really, really interesting. And I think he would ask good questions. Although if anybody has listened to him, he speaks at the slowest cadence you will ever listen to in your life. My God.
Would you rather listen to someone talk very fast or very slow?
Well, I mean, I turn most people up on podcasts to 1.5 speed, so I'm going to say fast. Yeah. Slow is irritating, man. I'm like, just get on with it.
Yeah.
And him on 1.5 speed is actually still slower than most people on 1 speed. It's crazy, but he recognizes it. But I guess he's just thinking a lot as he speaks. And then maybe someone of the past, just to get an interesting insight into what life was like. Then as to who that would be, you know what? No, I'd put someone. I just thought of him, and I don't know why, because I think he's an incredibly interesting person. He has his finger in a lot of different pies, and that would be someone like Bill Gates.
Yeah. Joe Rogan, Sam Harris, Bill Gates. That'd be an interesting conversation.
I'm sure I'm forgetting some people. You know, I should just throw like a really funny comedian in there, like an Ali Wong. Or something like that, just to like completely throw that table completely.
You know, I was asked the question. I randomly threw Ricky Gervais in there because I just knew like that'd be
very good choice.
Yeah,
so that's actually a very good choice, and it's a lot smarter, I think, than people realize.
Yeah. Have you watched that Afterlife show?
Great show.
Yeah,
great.
If you haven't watched that, everyone listening, go and watch Afterlife. A little bit somber at times, but fuck, it's good.
Yeah, I mean, if you can't make fun of death, like. That's a problem because we're all going to go through it at some stage. So, but he has like a really well balanced, I think, outlook on life too, which I think is actually really cool.
Yeah. Well, mate, thank you for jumping on. I very much appreciate it. Obviously, you've contributed, significantly to myself as a person and as an athlete over the last 5 years. So I'm very, very thankful for that and thankful for you jumping on. And hopefully there are some takeaways that the listeners can have from this. I'm sure there will be. And no doubt we'll have to get you back on, relatively soon. You might as well just stay on here and do my update for today.
Yeah, mate. I know. You know what? I deliberately did not listen to your update today so that I didn't get caught thinking about that. I'm like, he's going to go to the side. So
it's an interesting one today. So I'll leave it there.
I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Thanks, mate. I appreciate it. And I'll chat to you soon.
Get live, motherfucker.